So, Kansas versus Oklahoma, this is a potential college football playoff. This game is college football playoff implications, is what I'm trying to say. Kansas is the home team. This game will be played in David Booth, Kansas Memorial Stadium. Oklahoma is wildly favored by ESPN's FPI, who has them as the fourth best team in the country, and they give them an 87.4% chance to win. Oklahoma is favored by 9 points according to Vegas, and a lot of people are betting that Kansas is not only going to cover, but a lot of people are taking Kansas money line. So that is, in my mind, partly a red flag for an upset here. Like, my intuition tells me that along with some other games, that it's more likely Wisconsin beats Ohio State, for example, than Oklahoma losing this game to Kansas, just based off of where the bets are being placed. I mean, there's a lot of bets, probably a lot of money too, on Kansas pulling this out. Potential power, my power ranking system that you can again check in my Patreon page via the link in my video description. Potential power is only picking Oklahoma to win by 6. So potential power likes Kansas a lot. Kansas is a top 25 team according to potential power. And Oklahoma is not even top 10. Oklahoma's top 15 in potential power. Kansas is top 25. And the home field advantage also plays a role in Kansas covering this game according to potential power. I look here, and Oklahoma looked sketchy against UCF. They've let Iowa State and Cincinnati and other schools drive up and down the field on them. The win against Texas looks less impressive the more that Texas plays. Oklahoma, I think, is probably one of the more overrated undefeated teams, but that's just my opinion. And I thought that Texas was going to beat Oklahoma, full disclosure, and I was wrong. However, I don't think my intuition and analysis of Oklahoma overall is incorrect. There are holes in this team. Dylan Gabriel is not a perfect quarterback. Jeff Lebby is not an elite offensive coordinator. Oklahoma struggles to run the football, and they struggle to stop the run. UCF is a team that with John Rice Plumlee can run the football with their quarterback and their running back. They can do that. Guess who can do that? If Jalen Daniels is healthy? Kansas. Kansas can do that. Kansas can even do that to a more limited degree if Jason Bean is healthy. Jason Bean has 9 passing touchdowns on the year, 2 interceptions. Gabriel has 19 passing touchdowns with 3 interceptions. Kansas is running for over 212 yards per game. Now, Oklahoma did limit Texas's run game to a good degree. However, I wonder, honestly, if Kansas has the better rushing attack. I do. Kansas puts up 443 yards per game on offense. Oklahoma allows 359.9 yards on defense. That's not even 50 yards less than Kansas's defense. And Kansas, from a yards perspective, has a better pass defense than even Oklahoma does. But I anticipate that's because you can run on Kansas. Kansas does not have an impressive defensive line. And consequentially, I think that teams opt to run on the Jayhawks, much like Texas did, where they had over 300 rushing yards, rather than pass on them. That's also how Oklahoma State beat them, as Oklahoma State was able to run on the Jayhawks, and therefore Alan Bowman was able to fling it all around the field. Kansas, they're an offensive team. They don't have a whole lot of defense, if any defense. But with Jalen Daniels, their offense is nearly unstoppable. Right now, Kansas, I forget what statistic it was. Maybe it was points per play. I don't know exactly what it was, but I think it was... No. I know exactly what statistic this was. Kansas, when you look at total offense and when you look at yards per play, Kansas is 7th nationally in yards per play. They have 6.8 yards per play in their last 3 games. They've averaged 7.1 yards per play. At home, they average 7 yards per play. Overall, Kansas has more yards per play than Michigan, Florida State, Texas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Ole Miss, North Carolina, Ohio State. There are only 6 teams that average more yards per play than Kansas. Washington, duh. LSU, also duh. Oregon, USC, that's another duh moment. UCF, who played Oklahoma within 2, and Georgia. A lot of that due to Brock Bowers and also the fact that Georgia is a very effective team with play action. Very effective. I look at this game, I think that Oklahoma has the better defense. They have the better defensive linemen, linebackers, defensive backs. I think that Kansas, there's a lean toward them at special teams. I think that Kansas does have the better offensive line. And I think that they also have the better running back room. Quarterback, due to health, I have to give to Oklahoma with Dylan Gabriel and Jackson Arnold. Dylan Gabriel has 2,131 passing yards, 19 passing touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions. And has an 87.6 quarterback efficiency rating, which is 4th nationally. He has 230 rushing yards. He's averaging 4.3 yards per carry, and he has 5 rushing touchdowns. I mean, he is a great player. Really great player. And he has experience. He's been a starting quarterback since 2019. He has great experience, intuition, wisdom. He doesn't have, elite physical traits exactly, like especially arm strength, but he's accurate, still has a relatively strong arm, and he could win the Heisman in the offense that he runs and with the efficiency that he's been producing at. Meanwhile, Jason Bean and Devin Neal are players that I'm looking at for Kansas. Jason Bean, I'm going to have to assume that he's starting for now. 913 passing yards, 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, a 66.6 quarterback efficiency rating. A 173 passer rating, though, and he's averaging nearly 10 yards per pass attempt. He has 91 rushing yards. Devin Neal has 659 rushing yards, averaging 7.3 yards per carry, and he has 6 rushing touchdowns. Kansas on the season, again, electric offense. They're averaging 5.6 yards per carry on the ground, 9.5 yards per pass attempt. Overall, looking at this game, I'm picking Kansas to pull the upset, and I would not advise anyone else to do so. My intuition tells me that Oklahoma's going to come in here and win big. That's part of my intuition. Another part of me thinks that Oklahoma is just not going to go 13-0. I don't think so. I think that whether it's Cincinnati, whether it's UCF, whether it's even Texas, when Texas was playing their C-plus game, and Oklahoma nearly let the game get away from them until Texas decided to go prevent, which was just asinine. And then UCF. Against any kind of offense, this Oklahoma defense can be vulnerable. Against UCF's offense with a quarterback with mobility, and also Gus Malzahn, who's just extremely creative. Also, Kansas has nothing to lose. Texas in that Red River shootout game, Red River rivalry, Texas had everything to lose. Everything. So you call the game differently. Kansas, this is their time to secure bowl eligibility. This is their time to re-enter the top 25. I have them in my top 25 right now. If Kansas wants to contend for a conference championship, which is possible if they win this game, you got to win here. There's so many things that Kansas still has in their grasp, but they have 2 losses. And if you're Kansas and you're Lance Leipold, and if you're anyone on that Kansas roster, you know that in theory you aren't as talented or as big or as athletic as Oklahoma is. But you may have more fight. And I guarantee you that you have the better offensive coordinator in Andy Kotelnicki. You have home field advantage. That place is going to be full. It'll probably be one of the louder times in David Booth Memorial Stadium, which isn't, saying a whole lot. It's not a big stadium. But I think Kansas right here is going to pull off the upset and win 38-35. And this is with, my pick is still with Jason Bean at quarterback. if Jalen Daniels was guaranteed to start, my intuition would be telling me that this is probably closer to the correct pick. But with uncertainty at quarterback, my intuition's telling me Jason Bean isn't the same quarterback. He's good. He's great. He's more mistake prone. He isn't as mature. He's not as good of a scrambler or improviser. I think that Kansas may need that to beat Oklahoma, but there's the other side of this where Oklahoma, as a football team, I think is destined to lose a game. And whether that's to Kansas or Oklahoma State or in the Big 12 championship game or 2 out of the 3, I think that Oklahoma's practically a lock to reach the Big 12 championship game. Even more of a lock than Texas, just given the fact that they have an easier schedule. Texas already has a loss, etc. I think Oklahoma is going to slip up somewhere. I don't think that they're a national championship contender. Next year, with the recruiting that Brent Venables is doing and the job that he's doing, yeah, probably. But I think at some point, this team is going to be revealed as a team that is not a true top 5, top 6, top 8 team. I don't think Oklahoma is elite to be in the top 4, to be in the college football playoff. You typically have to be elite, have an easy schedule, or be extremely clutch, or be near elite. I think Oklahoma is very little, if any, of all of those things. So again, Kansas, 38, Oklahoma, 35. Look out for Dylan Gabriel. Look out for whoever starts at Kansas for quarterback. Look out for Devin Neal at running back. And defensively, look out for Peyton Bowen, elite safety, true freshman, I do believe, for the Sooners. Look out for him. He'll I think against this offense, it'll be very important for him to step up, not just as a blitzer like he has, but also in coverage. And he's been good just about everywhere. So those are some players to look out for. Up next, let's talk about pardon me. Let's talk about Michigan State traveling to Minnesota. Michigan State's 2-5, and Minnesota's 4-3. Both teams have a negative point differential. Both do. Minnesota's scoring around 20 points per game. They've allowed 24 points per game. And Michigan State's scoring around 18 points per game, and they've allowed about 27 points per game. I think Minnesota right now is peaking, I think. I think that for them to go on the road and beat Iowa in a very close, emotional game is a sign that, they're clutch, that PJ Fleck has not plateaued as a head coach, or at least he's not hit his ceiling exactly. And this Minnesota team lost a ton of production from last year. I thought they were going to practically reload, given the good strength and conditioning they have, the physicality, and also the way they use the portal. But oh, how I was wrong. They lost to North Carolina in a game where it was UNC's red zone efficiency and Ethan Kaliakmanis's and Cole Kramer's inaccuracy that decided that game. Minnesota choked a big lead to Northwestern, which you can see in how their defense performed the following few weeks. That definitely left a psychological impact on the team. And they got blown out by Michigan. But hey, any program that isn't great at this point, I think, would get blown out by Michigan and lose by 30 or 40 points. That's just how good Michigan is. Michigan State, on the other hand, the only thing they share really with Minnesota is that negative point differential. The fact that I thought they would be better than they're playing right now. That was one of my worst preseason picks of the year, is that Michigan State would have been a fringe top 25, potentially top 20 football team. That was my worst. That's probably my worst pick. Worst of the season, if I'm being honest, was picking Michigan State to do well. And you can see with Michigan State, if you watch their games, you can see that they have potential. They really do. But all in all, they didn't have the head coach to put it all together in Mel Tucker. Mel Tucker didn't hire the correct staff to train these guys. Strength and conditioning for Michigan State really starting last year was extremely questionable with all the injuries that they had, and just the lack of toughness and the fact that the team constantly quit and you were able to run the football in Michigan State. That's a sign of, weakness. And trench play wasn't good, tons of injuries, and the offensive line was horrendous. This year, Mel Tucker was suspended and later fired after 2 games for a sexual harassment allegation, which Michigan State ruled him guilty of. Mel Tucker's appealing that, but that's a whole mess. We're not going to talk about it. This game, Michigan State's 2-5. If they have any juice left, they have to unleash it here, because Minnesota is coming off of an emotional win. I said this in the preseason. This is probably the only thing about my preseason predictions for Minnesota, or more so Michigan State, that could still be right. I said that the Michigan State-Illinois stretch for Minnesota, that's a trap spot. That's a spot where after that Iowa game, which I predicted to be a win for Minnesota in the preseason, that was a preseason prediction that because of Darius Taylor's health, I wavered on, although I did say that if Darius Taylor started, they would win, and indeed they did. As one thing about the preseason I got right was that PJ Fleck would, in fact, beat Iowa, finally, mainly because of Brian Ferentz's offense, but whatever. This is a letdown spot for Minnesota. It really is. And for Michigan State, this is our rival just humiliated us and caused the worst loss in Michigan State Stadium history. It's time to be mad, or it's time to lay down and finally die. That's what you're going to see from Michigan State. They are either going to give this game their all, or they're going to quit. That's what's going to happen. And the Golden Gophers are given a 66.4% chance to win, according to FPI. Michigan State, they're given a decent chance by FPI. That's factoring in home field advantage, by the way. Michigan State's either going to try their hardest and probably escape with a win or come very close. And if they come very close but still lose, they'll probably quit the following week. Or they're going to quit right here. Potential Power doesn't care if Michigan State is going to play an inspired effort or not. Potential Power thinks Minnesota is a top 25 team that really just hasn't come together yet. That's what Potential Power views Minnesota as. They view Potential Power, my model, views Minnesota as a team with top 20 potential that hasn't gelled together yet. But when they gel together, they'll be a very extremely dangerous team. And Potential Power, as the name implies, again, check the link down in the description if you want, Potential Power picks for games, to see my Potential Power rankings. All of that's on Patreon if you're an All-American or a Heisman patron. Minnesota, as the Potential Power suggests, Potential Power often measures the potential of a team. Minnesota has Daniel Jackson. They have Corey Crooms. They have Darius Taylor. They have Sean Tyler. Ethan Kaliakmanis has a high ceiling as a quarterback. Minnesota's offensive line has, guys like Tyler Cooper, Quinn Carroll. This is off the top of my head. Nathan Bowie. That's the interior of the offensive line. And the tackles are really the newest players, so I don't know them quite as well. But Minnesota's averaging 4.1 yards per carry after, facing a tough Nebraska defense that it's hard to run on them unless you're an elite offense. And they faced an Iowa defense that's extremely stout. They were able to run for 3 yards per carry on them. Minnesota's weakness is their passing attack. They're only averaging 5.7 yards per attempt in the passing game, and they're only completing 52% of their passes. And they have more interceptions thrown on the year than touchdowns. It's not good. Minnesota's passing game isn't. But the one bright spot there is Daniel Jackson. Brevin Spanford's having a tough year. Same with Nick Callerup. Corey Crooms is 227 receiving yards, no receiving touchdowns. Daniel Jackson has 29 receptions, 387 receiving yards, and 5 receiving touchdowns. And he had 100, almost said 500. He had 100 receiving yards against Iowa. Daniel Jackson is a great wide receiver. Michigan State, the Spartans, all they really have in my mind is Nathan Carter. Really. I mean, Hauser's better than Kim, but Hauser's younger and doesn't have the same starting experience that Kaliakmanis does, and he has an even worse supporting cast. Carter, I think, is a player that even without a great supporting cast, he can still make plays, especially against a Minnesota defense that has been rather discombobulated. He has 565 rushing yards, averaging 4.3 yards per carry, and he has 4 receiving touchdowns, on top of 80 receiving yards on 12 receptions. So he's also involved in the passing game. Jonathan Kim. Jonathan Kim's a player to watch. 7 field goals made, 9 field goals attempted with a long of 58, and he's 12 of 12 in extra points. Jonathan Kim's another player to look out for because this game could come down to a lot of field goals being kicked. And it's the same with Minnesota's Dragan Kesich, who's 14 of 16 on field goals, long of 54. His only misses are from 40 yards or more, and he's also 100% on extra points. Dragan Kesich could end up being, the Big Ten or national kicker of the year, making almost 90% of his field goals, having a long of more than 50, and making 100% of his extra points. A big difference, too, in these teams, we talked about potential, especially offensively. Michigan State also has an underrated wide receiver core. Defensively is where the depth and the potential really is different. Both teams have 15 sacks. Both do. However, Minnesota's defense is only 392 tackles. Michigan State is 488. Michigan State's defense has a very tough time getting off the field. Minnesota's not exactly. They at least have some boom and not just only bust to their defense. Minnesota, the Golden Gophers, have 21 pass deflections, 9 interceptions, 5 forced fumbles. Michigan State only has 1 forced fumble. They have 6 interceptions, and they have 25 passes defended. So the Spartans, their secondary's not good. Their tackling isn't good. They love to tackle with their bodies, trying to hit players to get them to the ground. Very poor defense, one of the worst in the nation. Another Scotty Hazelton defense. For Michigan State, I just really have a hard time winning this football game. Now, I think that Scotty Hazelton employs a bend but don't break scheme. That's probably going to be the only thing that saves Minnesota from finally earning a positive point differential in this game, but I think Minnesota will dominate. Michigan State, by nature of the fact that Hauser has a good arm, he's much more accurate than Kim, Carter can make some plays, and whether it's Monterey Foster Jr. or Trey Mosley or Malik Carr, Malik Carr has just looked completely uninspired this season. I thought him and Brevin Spanford were going to have great years, and both of them are having very rough performances. Michigan State has talent on offense. Minnesota has been suspect on defense. And I think as a result, Michigan State will get a few points, probably touchdowns. Michigan State will either score or they will have a 3-and-out or perhaps a turnover. I mean, that will be the variation of the drive success for Michigan State. I think Minnesota will be much more consistent offensively and defensively. Wouldn't be shocked, though, if Michigan State is able to play this game closer, because Michigan State can stop the run. They love to blitz. They did that against Michigan, and they were able to limit Michigan's ground game, but then they couldn't stop Michigan's passing attack. And again, they could only limit Michigan's ground game. And, they lost 49-0. Minnesota does not have the same passing attack, but they will be able to get big plays with Kaliakmanis' arm and the fact that I expect Daniel Jackson to just be wide open on practically every play against this horrid secondary. The question is, how accurate can Kaliakmanis be? And Michigan has a better offensive line and a better running back room than Minnesota. So is there a chance that Michigan State shuts down Minnesota's run game? Yes. I don't think that'll happen, though. I think that Minnesota will run for perhaps close to 200 yards, and they will stubbornly, while chewing clock and perhaps having a few 3-and-outs, they will stubbornly run the football until Michigan State's defense just breaks. This could be a tied game at the half, or maybe, dare I say it, Michigan State's ahead at the halftime, but I'm stumbling over my words here. It's kind of weird. Minnesota will pull away. I think Minnesota wins. I think Minnesota covers. I think Michigan State's already quit to a large degree, and I think this is going to be, once again, another nail in a coffin that's already sealed, and the corpse has already been mummified. So that's game number 2. Finally, game number 3. Let's talk about Utah, who's just coming off a big win against USC. Let's talk about them hosting Oregon. Oregon's given a 68.7% chance to win according to FPI. Rice-Eccles Stadium, the Utah Utes haven't lost in Rice-Eccles Stadium, not counting the COVID year. I don't think they've lost in that stadium since 2018. They have a very impressive home game win streak. Kyle Whittingham's a top 4 head coach in all of college football. His staff is top 4 in all of college football. They're extremely efficient. I mean, look at Sione Vaki, one of the better safeties in college football, being converted to a running back and also being utilized out of the backfield as a receiver, and how seamless his transition seemed. Bryson Barnes played the game of his life. I know it was against USC's defense, but nonetheless, he still showed that he has some upside to him. Very impressive performance by Utah. And their only loss is to an Oregon State team who I think is top 10 and who I think is one of the 5 best offenses in the country. Yes, Oregon State is that good offensively. I think we can all say, looking back on it, that loss to Washington State was a fluke. Washington State ran a genius offense and unfortunately was figured out, and now they're probably going to struggle to go bowling. They'll probably make one, but they'll finish 7-5, 6-6, probably. Maybe even worse. Maybe they miss a bowl game. I don't know. I don't know what their schedule is outside of the fact that they have yet to face Washington, who will probably pound them, but that's beside the point. We're talking about Utah and Oregon here. Oregon, meanwhile, Dan Lanning, I think, is a great coach. The problem with Dan Lanning is he's uber aggressive. He's very stubborn. A friend has told me that he comes across as a jerk. Now, the latter part doesn't have much to do with winning football games, but what I'm tying that to is the fact that Dan Lanning likes to do what Dan Lanning wants to do, and that got him in trouble against Washington, and I could totally see it getting him in trouble again in this game against a much more competent defense. And while Rice-Eccles isn't as loud as Husky Stadium, the fan base of Utah is typically more engaged and more passionate than the fan base of Washington, from what I know. I mean, I've seen multiple games of the Huskies where their stadium is not full. Meanwhile, Utah stadium seems to be always full, fan base always engaged, and I imagine Utah is going to maybe wear a different uniform, or they're going to do something special for this game, because if Utah wins this game, there's a very good chance, given how Washington's looked, given the fact that Colorado at the end of the year is probably a good win for Utah. Utah's playoff hopes are alive if they win. And for Oregon, they're dead if they lose, but they're alive if they win, and Utah's hopes are dead. This is a playoff elimination game. In one sense, you could say that this is the semifinal to the playoff semifinals. You could say that. Oregon's favored by 6.5, according to Vegas. And then when you take a look at potential power favors Oregon to win by 9. It predicts Oregon to win by 9. Pardon me. Again, last time I'm going to mention it, check out potential power via the link in the description by joining my Patreon as an All-American or Heisman. My potential power rankings will be posted tomorrow, and I'm going to try and get game day picks for Saturday's games either out Friday night or early Saturday morning. So check that out via the link in the description. And also like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment your prediction for this game down below in the chat and in the comment section. Thank you very much. I think some players to look out for Utah, I would say look on the interior of their defensive line. The interior of Utah's defensive line struggled mightily this year. It did. And it has. They are allowing right now 78 rushing yards per game, but I don't think that tells the whole story, because against Oregon State and against USC, they were gashed on the ground. Marshawn Lloyd had 7 carries for 86 yards. The issue is you have to have a good running back, a great running back, or a great offensive line, or both to run on Utah, because Utah's defense is just that fundamentally sound, that they're not going to let anyone run the football on them. But I'm telling you that 78 rushing yards allowed, same with Oregon, 95 rushing yards allowed, both of those run defenses are puffed to the brim. The beer, as an analogy, only 1/3 of the cup is full of actual beer, the rest is foam. These are overinflated running defenses. They just are. Now, that doesn't mean that both teams are going to run for 300 on each other and, control the clock, because I also think that both offenses, when functioning at peak capacity, are really, really, really good. For Oregon, I look at the Ducks, and their offense is one of the best in the country. 553 passing yards, or total yards per game, pardon me. They allow just over 300 yards, 312.6. Utah allows under 300 yards per game, but they only have 345 yards per game on offense. Again, like I mentioned, when they function at peak efficiency, Utah does have a good offense, but they haven't functioned at peak efficiency very often because Cameron Rising hasn't played all year, and he's not going to play for the rest of the season. He's going to be redshirted and either return next year or head into the transfer portal. But if Bryson Barnes, and I think Nate Johnson's injured, I don't know. If Bryson Barnes can play like he did against USC in this game, have an inspired performance, I think he definitely gained confidence against the Trojans. I think in this game, there's a large potential that Oregon could be in trouble here. At the same time, though, Potential Power thinks that Oregon is going to win, Oregon is going to cover, and a lot of that stems from the fact that Oregon has, Troy Franklin, Bucky Irving, Bo Nix, Jackson Powers Johnson, who I think is the second best center behind Cedric Van Pran in all of college football. For Utah, if they want to win this game, what's going to have to happen is their defense is going to have an amazing performance. They're going to have to force turnovers. They have 7 interceptions, 7 forced fumbles, 25 passes deflected, 25 sacks. They're going to have to step up. They will. Junior Tafanu, he's going to have a great day. Logan Fano, going to have a great day. Jonah Ellis, going to have to continue to perform at a high level. He right now is 10 sacks. He's going to need to have a handful of sacks against Oregon for the Utah Utes to come out on top. Cole Bishop, 2 picks. Lander Barton, who's unfortunately out for the season. Utah's just dealt with so many injuries, but yet they continue to reload. They continue to retool. And bringing in Sione Vaki and having him play against USC, the seamless transition that he made there, he's only going to get better and fit more within the offense the longer the season goes on. For context about these passing offenses, Bryson Barnes has a 126.3 passer rating on the year. With 633 passing yards, he's averaging 7.1 yards per pass attempt, 4 passing touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and on the ground, Utah's averaging 4.2 yards per rush with 11 rushing touchdowns and 1,283 rushing yards. Oregon, meanwhile, the Ducks are so much more successful. Bo Nix has over 2,000 passing yards. Bo Nix has 19 passing touchdowns, only 1 interception, a 180.2 passer rating. He's completed 78.4% of his passes. The Ducks are averaging 6.8 yards per carry with 21 rushing touchdowns. They have 1,588 rushing yards. And I think Oregon, statistically, from a yards per play aspect, from a total yards aspect, from an explosive play aspect, probably from, the EPA metrics, is probably going to be the more impressive team in this game. And I think they're going to win. I do, because Utah, offensively, I think they're going to have an inspired effort. I think that Oregon's defense is a little overrated, and I think Utah's defense, rather, is a little underrated. However, I don't think that Utah has enough capacity offensively to come out and win. I think if they had Cameron Rising, if they had Brant Kuthi, if they had Lander Barton, if they had those players healthy, I'd pick Utah to win in a heartbeat. But I think that Utah is going to cover. In fact, my intuition tells me that this is going to be a close game. Part of me thinks that Utah will win, but Oregon is just so much more efficient offensively. I think that at the end of the day, this will be probably another game where we look at Dan Lanning's game management, and there are probably some questionable calls. I expect Oregon to be aggressive here, being it's on the road against a one-loss team and against a defense that Lanning's going to want to wear down. And I think that Utah will stop multiple fourth down attempts by Dan Lanning. The problem is, unlike Washington, I don't think Utah has the offense to capitalize on that. I don't think they do. I think if Oregon in this game, this is me kind of making an advanced prediction here. I think what, in retrospect, what we'll talk about in this game if Oregon was just willing to not put its head in the sand and go for it on every fourth down, this game it would be over by the middle of the fourth quarter. Like, Oregon would have a double-digit lead, Utah would be out of character, and maybe Oregon's defense forces a turnover. I think Kyle Whittingham's superior game management, his experience as a head coach compared to Dan Lanning's youth and energy, I think that brings this game closer than what would typically occur, especially being that this isn't on a neutral field. This is at Utah. This is not at Autzen Stadium. This is not in Las Vegas. There will be crowd noise. Road Bo Nix, he did well against Washington, but he's still suspect. And I think that Utah does have a better defense than Washington. So we'll see how well Bo Nix does. I expect Oregon to surrender a turnover. They'll probably fail on, I think, 2 fourth downs. But I think their run game, their passing offense, I think every time that Utah doesn't stifle them on fourth down or get an early 3 and out, Oregon probably scores on that drive. I think that Utah will settle for field goals. I think they'll force, again, a few stops, probably collect 1. I'd actually lean toward 2 turnovers. That's partially why they stay in this game, I think, is they get either a few sacks, maybe a strip sack, more likely than not an interception or 2, maybe a forced fumble. They've been good at getting turnovers. They get those in Oregon territory. Utah, I think, will win the field position battle, but Oregon will come out on top. That's just my opinion, though, and much like the Oklahoma-Kansas game, this is going outside of Big Ten territory, so don't take my full word for it. I don't have much confidence in this pick, but I think I know more about Oregon and Utah than I do Oklahoma and Kansas, and I sense that this is going to be a close game.